imagine you're at the end of your cut, whether that's a prep or just a cutting protocol. You've got, your lowest body fat, ideally at that point, your lowest caloric intake at that point, and also your lowest maintenance metabolic rate at that point. So when you're dropping calories, your metabolism depresses as basically a survival mechanism to, survive in the context of that lower intake. If you were to automatically bring your maintenance intake back to what it was at the onset of the prep, that would be above your maintenance, and you'd likely put on a bunch of unnecessary body fat. So what I typically recommend people do with my protocol, there's that period, that month or so at the very end where their protein's a little bit lower. So after the cut is over, I'll automatically bump that protein back up to about a 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass, or per pound of, body weight at that point, because they are probably going to be pretty lean, just to basically ensure they don't have any muscle wasting in that context.
Good to see you, man. How you doing? I like this. I like the studio there. It's nice.
Yeah.
Are you still in Arkansas? Where are you at today?
Yeah, we're in Arkansas. We just bought a new warehouse space, so we're in the new studio space. This is in Northwest Arkansas now.
Very nice. Awesome. Well, for the folks that don't know you, and there's a few people in here, and some people maybe listening to the podcast haven't met you before. Give us a quick rundown on who you are, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I'm Robert Sikes. Keto Savage is what they call me online, and basically I'm a natural ketogenic bodybuilder. I've been bodybuilding for 14 years now, about 7 of which have been strictly ketogenic, kind of like a carnivore-esque ketogenic approach, and that's pretty much what I do. So I, have a podcast as well, speak at conferences, and put out content around optimizing performance and body composition with a ketogenic low-carb approach.
Yeah, and you also make the keto brick, which is a lot of people utilize. It's a keto, I guess, macro design, I guess, meal replacement thing that I've actually tried. I think it's quite good. How's that been going? It seems like you continue to grow that business as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So the keto bricks were born out of my 2017 competition prep endeavors. We started the production with my girlfriend at the time, wife now, and it's just continued to grow and grow. We've got several employees now, and that's what this facility that we're in now is all about. We do all the production in-house as opposed to outsourcing it to somebody else to mess up and put a bunch of crap ingredients in that we don't want.
Yeah, and your wife is Crystal, right? If I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember.
Yep, Crystal.
Did I get that right? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah.
She's
doing okay as well.
Yeah, she's 32 weeks pregnant as of yesterday. So we got a baby on the way, and she's been doing the whole pregnancy with a ketogenic approach. So pretty cool for sure.
And is that that's baby number 1, or I can't remember. Is that first one?
Yeah, baby number 1 for us, man. So we're in uncharted territory for sure. Gonna be learning as we go.
Life's about to start getting really, really strange for you, I can tell you.
Yes, indeed.
So, and has she had any, this is an interesting topic. So she's been on a ketogenic diet. How has her obstetrician been? Have they been supportive? Have they been, I know a lot of times with the oral glucose tolerance test, they often use, that's something that people on ketogenic diets, carnivore diets don't do well with for reasons that make sense. But has she been doing okay with her obstetrician?
Yeah, honestly, we're going like straight hippie mode, man. Like we're doing a midwife, having the birth at home. We waived the glucose test, so we don't even have to do that. She got a CGM and like showed them the data from the CGM, showed the midwife the data from that for 2 weeks. So I mean, she's good. I mean, she's not once broken her nutrition. She stayed training the whole time as well. So the pregnancy's been super smooth, honestly.
Good for her. That's awesome. And do you know boy, girl yet, or is that something you're gonna find out later?
No, it's a boy, man. So we got a little boy on the way. Got a little workout partner coming for sure.
Awesome. That's wonderful. That's wonderful to see. Well, tell me, I know you got a book out too. Has that been published yet, or what's the story on the book?
Yeah, so I published that on the 30th of January. It's been out for just over a month now, and it's doing pretty good so far. So just trying to get the word out about that. But it's all about ketogenic bodybuilding, kind of my protocol as it relates to getting ready for a competition, and doing well with that competition, improving body composition, losing body fat, and ideally winning the show with a strict ketogenic / carnivore approach.
Yeah, let me ask you, because that's something that a lot of people have an interest in, particularly, and not everybody, most people aren't bodybuilders. I mean, I'm not a bodybuilder, right? I lift weights, but I'm definitely not a bodybuilder. But I certainly, prefer to be leaner rather than less lean. And so that's something I think, and some of that may not directly carry over to the average person just trying to lose 10 pounds, but some of it does. And so when you're trying to get leaner, how do you do that on a higher fat approach? I mean, if you're still in ketosis, then, well, ketosis doesn't always mean high fat, but in many cases it does. So what are you doing to get lean?
Yeah. So from a really high level, basically what I do is I'll start myself and my clients off at a pretty high fat ratio, like 80% of their calories coming from dietary fat, which is pretty high. So the protein is relatively low in the grand scheme of things, in the context of the higher calorie intake. But I'm starting them at around their maintenance intake, so they're not at a deficit at the onset. And then over the course of 4 to 6 months, however long we're doing the prep for, I'll gradually titrate the fat down and the protein up simultaneously, figure out what their unique protein threshold is. Once I've reached that, I'll start dropping both protein and fat. And then at that point, they're normally 2 or 3 months in. And then we'll start dropping that protein as well, so that the ending ratio is probably around 75% fat. It's going to be a little bit different for every client, obviously, but basically start with a higher fat ratio, increase protein until they get to roughly a 1 to 1. That's when most people reach that threshold, and then start dropping both protein and fat so that they end the cut with their relatively high fat ratio. But all the while, calories are dropping.
Yeah, so basically it's a caloric restriction. And I mean, the sort of the folks that say, it's all about calories, or say, well, it's still all about calories, but are there advantages? I mean, I've talked to people that have done higher fat carnivore cuts, keto cuts, and they say it's more comfortable for them. I mean, maybe it's the fat and the hormone production. What is the value of being a caloric restriction but having the higher fat ratios?
Yeah, so a couple things. I think because I used to do traditional bro diets approach to competition prep, and I've placed well. I've gotten really lean with those methods as well. What I noticed is that by having a higher fat ratio, my testosterone didn't take near as much as a hit in the context of those lower calories. So my hormones stayed more stable. I felt more satiated. I wasn't a slave to eating every 6 or 7 hours like most people recommend. And also, since I'm not eating carbohydrates because I'm doing a ketogenic approach, my only real viable option for energy is dietary fat, because at that point I'm pretty lean. I don't have a whole lot of stored fat to tap into. So the higher I can keep my energy levels with that higher dietary fat coming in, the harder I can train. And the harder you can train, the more likely you are to preserve the lean muscle tissue that you have. So it's kind of counterintuitive. But in the past, when I would have 300 grams of protein and a relatively low fat intake in an attempt to preserve muscle in the context of those lower calories, I actually found that having the higher fat and somewhat lower protein in the context of the lower calories actually was more, muscle preserving than opposite.
Now you're talking about, well, there's a couple things I want to go here. So it was interesting. I was scanning through Twitter today, and Amber Hearn referenced a study where they looked at low carbohydrate diets, high protein versus lower protein, and the high protein was above 35% protein. And in the higher protein group, they actually saw a reduction in testosterone levels.
Hmm.
And the supposition was maybe the testosterone was somehow used to deal with excess urea. And so when you're saying, um, you know, you're still relative. I mean, standard American diet, 15% of calories coming from protein. I would assume even in your ketogenic higher fat approach, you're exceeding that. Is that fair to say? I mean, where are you at on protein typically, even when you're down?
Yeah. So when I'm in like a traditional building phase, like I'm right now, I'm taking in 200 plus grams of protein a day, and I only weigh 180 pounds to give some context
Right.
there. So I'll typically start at around 150 grams of protein. And then over the course of that prep, I'll bring it up to 200, 225 grams of protein. I'll start dropping it down. And I think my last prep, I got down to right around 100 grams of protein per day. I've gone as far as 65 grams of protein a day for a very finite period. And that was kind of more so just for me to see what the extremes were and what I could tolerate without seeing any, muscle loss. And I didn't see any muscle loss at that 65 grams of protein. I don't recommend that low for most people by any means, but I wanted to see what the extremes were so that I could feel confident when I'm manipulating my clients' macros. But it is incredibly interesting to see how low you can take protein in the context of a finite period of time, as you are in for a competition prep. If you are well fat adapted, I mean, your body's ability to preserve muscle is significantly enhanced, in my opinion, versus that of what you would experience if you kept protein incredibly high. I mean, most competitors leave protein very high, like 250, 300 grams plus, but then they lose strength rapidly there towards the end. Their testosterone takes a massive nosedive and they just feel like shit, honestly. So I was able to bypass a lot of that by manipulating the protein and the fat such that in the grand scheme of things, my fat ratio stayed relatively high.
Yeah, and you say a finite period of time. I did a little experiment. I did a very high fat approach, very low calorie approach, but I extended for several months, and I ended up losing a decent amount of weight and some lean and a fair amount of lean mass too. So I didn't really, like I said, I think that time limitation. So what are we talking about when finding? Obviously contest prep, we're talking a period of a few weeks at most. I imagine when you get down to that really really low caloric phase. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So when my protein is down like sub 100 grams per day, it's only for a few weeks. It's only like during that last month of the prep. And then in that month, I'm also having a ketogenic caloric refeed once or twice a week. And on that day, my protein bumps up quite a bit higher. So my average protein intake for the week is probably north of that 100 grams. So I'm not staying, sub 100 grams for, months on end by any means. I've got the keto caloric refeed coming in to give me a bump. And then as soon as the competition's over, I'll typically return my daily protein intake to right about a 1 gram per pound of lean mass or so, just to hedge my bets to make sure I'm not losing any muscle. And then I'll slowly start titrating both that and fat up in a reverse diet. But yeah, I mean, there's no benefit to staying extremely low protein for an extended period of time, just on average. I mean, you're not going to be well suited for building more muscle, for preserving the muscle you've got. So I've seen kind of both ends of the spectrum. I've seen people in the low carb space just, scared of protein and gluconeogenesis and avoid it at all costs. And I've seen people here lately, it seems they've given protein the halo, and people are advocating that they eat, 300 grams plus a day, which isn't really optimal either in the context of being fat adapted and really trying to maximize, your energy and what you're fueling with.
Yeah, and you mentioned muscle sparing, but let's talk about muscle building, because that's obviously those are different concepts. I mean, traditionally when we talk about muscle building, we're talking about adequate protein, caloric. Obviously the resistance training is an extremely important part of it. You're not going to build muscle without training to any significant degree, and then also somewhat of a caloric surplus. Most people recommend. Are you building muscle in a caloric deficit, or do you like to be in a surplus for that?
I mean, you can build some muscle in a caloric deficit, but you're certainly not going to optimize for it. I mean, everybody says, hey, I want to build muscle and lose fat. I mean, that's what everybody wants, but you're going to optimize for either of those phases. If you have standalone phases, like if you're in a cutting phase, you're going to be well suited for losing body fat in a caloric deficit. If you're in a building phase, you're going to want to be in a caloric surplus to optimize, giving your body the amount of fuel necessary and the amount of building blocks necessary to add more lean tissue. And you may have to bring on some extra body fat in that context, but ideally, most of the weight that you're gaining will be more lean mass as opposed to that fat tissue. So really kind of prioritizing whether it is to build muscle or lose fat as opposed to trying to do both simultaneously is going to be better for most people.
Yeah, and when you're, I mean, there's the traditional bodybuilding, bulking and cutting, and then the dirty bulks where they, some of these pro guys will put on 40, 50, 60, 70 pounds in the off season, and then they cut that much. I mean, that's something you don't do, I assume. I mean, I imagine you probably stay within, I don't know, 10, 15 pounds, maybe. Is that fair to say? Or how much do you swell up in the off season?
Man, I did that my first prep. I bulked up to 230 pounds. This was before keto. And I was convinced I was going to step on stage at 200 pounds, natural. And, I gave myself 12 weeks because that's what all the magazines said I'd do. And I had no idea what I was doing. I lost 80 pounds in 12 weeks, lost a ton of muscle in the process, and pretty much swore that off going forward. So now I stay within about 20 pounds of my stage weight. Like right now I'm 180. I typically compete at 160. So it's much easier. It's much more sustainable. It's much healthier year round. Like I don't have to walk around like the New Year blimp. I just feel better. And I look better. I feel more comfortable in my skin year round as opposed to having these crazy fluctuations on the extremes.
Yeah, and and as someone who's a natural bodybuilder, it's almost an anomaly, particularly in these days. It's more and more accepted people take drugs, but and I'm the same. I've never taken any of that stuff, but I mean, how much muscle have you been able to put on consistently over this? Like, you've been doing this for, you said, a decade or more. And how much muscle have you actually, lean mass, have you been able to accumulate as a ketogenic bodybuilder over the last X amount of years?
Man, I don't know. I would say like when you first start working out, it's not uncommon to put on 20 pounds in your first year or two. You get those beginner gains. You get this totally new stimulus that your body's responding well to. But then after you lift for 2 or 3 years, you have a lot more muscle maturity. It's going to be much harder to move the needle from a lean muscle gain standpoint because that stimulus that you're subjecting your body to is a familiar stimulus. So I'm happy now if I put on 2 pounds of muscle a year, roughly, as a natural bodybuilder. And even if my weight doesn't change that drastically year after year after year, the look that I bring to the show day does change quite a bit. The muscle maturity looks different, the symmetry, the proportion, how the muscles tie in together, all that changes with the time that you spend training. And if you look at any natural bodybuilder, even if they're not following a ketogenic approach, many of them will take pictures of their competitive seasons year after year after year, and there's not a big fluctuation in scale weight. I mean, they typically stay, they gain a pound, maybe 2 pounds every single year. That's pretty typical for natural bodybuilders.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell I've been lifting weights for 42 years now. I can tell you it's tough to put on a lot of muscle after 40 some years of doing it, particularly as you get older and older, and then your priorities kind of change. I've been doing this martial arts stuff, so that they don't necessarily go hand in hand with building muscle. Let me ask you about this training, because that's another, obviously diet is a huge part of this, and you kind of focus on the ketogenic side of it. What about your training? How is that? How do you approach training?
Yeah, so I like to do kind of like a body part split, so to speak. What I've been doing lately that I found a lot of success with is I'll do a it's like an 8-day rotational split, basically. So for every 8-day window, I've got 6 days of training, 2 days of recovery. And in those 6 days of training, I'm basically targeting each muscle group twice, except for biceps. I only do biceps once. And then with each of those targets, one's more of a heavy focus. So I'm doing, primary compound movements. I'm going much heavier with a little bit lower rep range. And the next time I train that same muscle group, it's a little bit lighter focus, more hypertrophy focus, in the 15 rep range or so, 15, 20, kind of focusing more on blood flow. So by doing 2 frequency sessions a week per given muscle group, which tends to work pretty well for most natural athletes, and having one day where it's focused on more heavier lifts and one day where it's focused on more blood flow, I'm kind of covering all my bets, so to speak, and getting the most bang for those training sessions. And I'm able to recover pretty good in between sessions because I'm not training the same muscle group day after day. It's like, one day I'll do like heavy back hypertrophy shoulders, and then I'll do something similar to that, in reverse 2 or 3 days later.
Have you found, there's been a lot of evolution in, I guess, gym products and thoughts. I mean, blood flow restriction bands have come out. I mean, have you found any of this stuff? I mean, a lot of people say I just stick to the basics. I'll take a barbell and I'll squat and I'll deadlift and I'll bench press and I'll do flies and shoulder presses and all that stuff. Have you incorporated some of the newer type stuff, or have you experimented with any of that stuff? And if so, have you found it helpful or not?
Yeah, I'm kind of more of a back to the basics kind of guy when it comes to my training. I don't try and reinvent the wheel too much there. But I do like the concept of BFR, blood flow restriction training, especially in the context of if you've got an injury, because you can force a lot of blood into the muscle without having to load all of your joints near as much. So I'll sometimes do, BFR training if I'm traveling, if I've got limited equipment, I don't have enough weight, room to bring weights with me, or I'm using resistance bands or something like that. Or if I've got an injury, I'm trying to force a lot of blood into the muscle, but not subject it to a heavy load. So in that context, I think BFR is, super effective.
Let me ask you about your sources of fat, because I mean, obviously the ketogenic brick, I think it was cocoa butter. I think obviously you're eating a lot of animal fat. When you work with clients, and I believe you do, what do you have them eating for their fat sources? I mean, like I said, there's a lot of potential fats out there. We could be chugging, corn oil and still say it's high fat. So how do you handle the fat sources?
Yeah, so I always encourage my clients to prioritize animal fats and proteins. So using, fattier cuts of meat if you're getting it from good quality sources. I have them, bring in some monounsaturated fats, some olive oil, some avocado oil, fatty fish, things of that nature. If they want to use the keto brick, then, more power to them. They certainly don't have to. I don't make that like a distinguishing factor or requirement by any means, but I'm probably a little biased and partial to it because I make it. I mean, it's good quality stuff. So I use that. It's got cacao butter, like you said, is the base, which is the highest source of stearic acid, even more so than beef suet. So I do like the brick. My body assimilates the nutrients well. But yeah, that and animal fats, avocado on occasion, something like that, olive oil, fish oil, things of that nature. But it's interesting. There's a huge debate right now in the low carb carnivore keto community about vegetable oils and processed inflammatory oils, and if there should be stayed away from or not. I personally don't use them, so I tend to veer from them because I just try to minimize processed foods that I'm consuming. So I don't really point people in the direction of a bunch of processed trans fats and vegetable oils.
And then I guess it's obviously if you're including uh, animal fats, and you're obviously including animal proteins. I mean, they usually come together. What do you feel about the role of, say, protein powders, whey protein, collagen protein, things like that? Do they have a place for you, or I mean, because a lot of people use those to bump up their protein. It's an easy way to get protein in, and because you're focusing on fat, I mean, and protein is not as big of a concern for you. How big are you on protein powders?
It's interesting, man. Like I don't like my supplementation in general has drastically reduced since adopting this style of eating. I mean, right now I'm eating, like I said, 200 grams protein. So that's still pretty high protein, but I don't have any issues hitting that number through just the normal day-to-day food that I'm consuming. Like if someone's got a hard time getting the protein in, then using a protein shake on occasion to just kind of, get that in on the go. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I wouldn't encourage people to make that their, default by any means. But if you're getting, plenty of red meat in, some chicken on occasion, some fish. I mean, you shouldn't really have trouble hitting the protein markers. Certainly wouldn't recommend leaning too heavily on the supplements to do so.
Yeah, what about timing of meals and meal frequency? There's a lot of debate in circles about, we can only, you see this, we can only utilize 30 grams of protein per meal, and there's a lot of problems with those studies, and how big is the person, what is a meal containing? Most of the studies were done using protein powders, so the absorption characteristics are very different. And if you're eating, steak, it's not very convenient for me to eat steak 6 times a day. I mean, it's just a lot of a lot of cleanup and work, and so I prefer to eat, twice a day. Typically works for me. How do you deal with that? Are you every 3 hours eat meals, or how do you deal with that stuff?
Shoot, no, man. I used to be like when I was doing traditional bro dieting, I would eat every 2.5, 3 hours. I would bring my Tupperware with me everywhere I went. I'd open up Tupperware, stick it in the microwave in the middle of final exams when I was in college. But that to me is not sustainable or enjoyable. So now I eat typically 2 meals a day, sometimes three if I'm really pushing the calories up. And then when my calories are lower, when I'm in like a competition prep and they get sub 1900 calories, I typically transition to an OMAD style approach. Because for me, and I found this in a lot of my clients as well. It's more satisfying to have one large meal that actually leaves you satiated than to have multiple smaller meals sprinkled throughout the day that always leave you wanting more. So from a psychological standpoint, in the context of a deficit where you're trying to make it as sustainable as possible, I think having that one big bolus meal and then, making all your protein and fat pretty much, comprising that meal, that to me is more sustainable. And I don't have any issues from an absorption standpoint. My body's got enough of a fasting window after that to fully absorb everything that I'm consuming. I don't, like I said, see any dip in performance or strength. So I don't feel like I'm in a muscle wasting stance by not eating protein more frequently. So if you're fat adapted and you only want to do one meal a day and you're getting enough calories in that meal, then I'd say more power to you.
No, because you mentioned strength, but I mean, I guess from bodybuilding, strength is not the main focus here. There's there's plenty of super strong guys that are not bodybuilder, and it's more about efficiency of exercise. And bodybuilding often is about inefficiency. If you listen to guys like Ben Pakulski, I mean, it's just like, how do I make this as hard as possible for me to move this weight rather than making it easier? Do you find that, I mean, are you focusing on strength? Are you kind of really just focusing on contracting the muscle and, not necessarily using particularly heavy weights?
Yeah, so strength isn't necessarily the my primary proxy or goal. Like I want to bring the best shape and conditioning and size and symmetry that I can on show day. However, I like lifting heavy. I like lifting hard. I like lifting intensely, and then I use strength as a marker for am I maintaining my lean muscle mass in the context of a deficit? Because if I'm losing body fat, if my calories are getting lower and lower, but my strength is staying pretty constant, then I can feel relatively confident that I'm not losing a lot of muscle in the context of that deficit. So I like to use strength as a marker for that. Plus, I mean, I like getting stronger. Like when I'm in the off season, when I'm trying to build as much muscle as possible, I'm not looking leaner every week because I'm in a surplus. So I use strength and the progress I'm seeing in the gym as my primary proxy for progress to get me excited and know that I'm on the right track. So yeah, I definitely put a lot of emphasis on strength for sure.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that certainly makes sense. I mean, you can feel when you're strong. You feel better when you're stronger, I think, too. Um, Tell us a little more about the book, Robert. What's the name of the book? Tell us what you can find in the book? What kind of topics you cover? I mean, obviously you kind of giving an overview here, but what are people going to find when they get your book?
Yeah. So the title of the book's Ketogenic Bodybuilding, a natural athlete's guide to competitive savagery. And basically I break it down into 7 phases that I use for myself and my clients when I'm taking them through a competition prep. And you don't have to be, stepping on stage and competing for the book to be relevant to you. Basically anybody that's wanting to improve their body composition and lose body fats and preserve as much muscle as possible would benefit from it. The first phase being basically establishing that baseline, figuring out what your current body fat percentage is, figuring out what your starting macronutrient intake should be. Second phase being finding the protein threshold that is for you personally. Third phase is dropping both protein and dietary fat. Fourth phase is the introduction of ketogenic caloric refeeds in the context of those lower calories to preserve muscle. Phase 5 is for the actual peak week. So if you were to compete or have a photo shoot or whatever the apex of that cut looks like for you, that's where phase 5 comes in. And then phase 6 and 7 are all about the reverse diet. So many people, this is honestly one of my big frustrations right now. So many people are constantly talking about cutting calories and losing body fat, but there's not really much discussion around the importance of reverse dieting and spending time in caloric surplus to let your hormones stabilize, your metabolic rate upregulate, and honestly just put yourself in a better position to build muscle. So I really try to talk about the reverse diet phase and getting back into a healthy, sustainable caloric surplus.
How, I mean, again, for those of us that don't bodybuild, or what about you get somebody, bodybuilding, we're talking, sub 6% body fat in most, in many cases. And that is something that, you just can't maintain for very long. I mean, at least that's my understanding.
Yeah.
But, you might be able to maintain sub 10% for definite periods. There's some guys you see just walking around and they're pretty lean all the time. How do people go about that particular thing? Let's say I don't want to compete as a bodybuilder, but I want to walk around at 10% body fat year round. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah. So the
What's for
best way I
lift?
would explain it is, all right, so let's just use those 7 phases that I illustrated there. If every time you cycle through those 7 phases, you're basically improving your body's starting and stopping position. So at the end of a reverse diet and building phase, you're ideally at a higher caloric intake and lower body fat than you were at the onset of a competition prep or cutting phase. And if each time you cycle through those phases, you're basically improving your starting and stopping point, you're going to improve what your baseline metabolic rate is, what your baseline caloric intake is, and what your baseline body fat percentage is at maintenance. So for me, like right now, I don't even know what my body fat percentage is right now, probably around 12% or so. And 12% for me, being a bodybuilder for 14 years looks a lot different than 12% for people that don't bodybuild. But I'm at a super healthy maintenance. I like the way I look right now. I feel good. It's easy for me to maintain, and I can pretty much eat intuitively in the off season while still having visible abs and vascularity throughout the year. So every time you cycle through those phases, if you're doing it properly, implementing a healthy caloric surplus phase and a reasonable and strategic deficit phase, you're going to improve your baseline starting and stopping point. So you're going to be able to maintain that lower body fat percentage more effortlessly on average at the end of that reverse diet period.
And you mentioning like when your caloric lowest you get, slightly, something under in your 180 pounds, maybe down to 160 when you compete, still 1900 calories or there and about. That's a lot more than most people would expect. We get people going on these 800 calorie a day diets, which is just almost kind of crazy in my view.
Yeah.
Um, where do you, I mean, you said, every time I get lean and I get leaner and then I refeed, I end up, having the ability to eat more calories and yet stay at a relatively lean weight. How much are you shifting? I mean, if you track this fairly meticulously, which I assume you probably do, like 5 years ago, how many calories could you eat a day at 12% body fat versus maybe today? Has there been a difference that you've seen?
Yeah. I mean, like right now, I'm probably consuming an average of about 3,000. Like I can maintain my current conditioning, anywhere between a window of about 3,000 calories and 3,500 calories. Anywhere between that for me, I'm able to maintain pretty effortlessly. Like I don't have to track anything. I can just consume that and eat intuitively, and my body holds steady right there. In the past, whenever I'd go into a building phase, especially when I was eating a bunch of carbohydrates, I would still track. There was one experiment where I did where I was eating 6,000 calories a day. And 6,000 calories coming from a bunch of carbohydrates, I got fat. That's when I got 230 pounds. But I did 6,000 calories in the carnivore setting as well. And this is super interesting. I don't honestly understand this, but I pretty much peaked at about 185, 190 pounds. I was not able to break free of that. And I did 6,000 calories for 3 months, but I pretty much plateaued at about the month and a half mark. So that I found was interesting. Plus my desire to, like, I don't have to force feed. I don't have to try and restrict it all when I'm doing this in that context and that setting. The more muscle you have, the higher your metabolic rate is going to be anyways. So if you're going through these building and cutting phases and ideally building muscle each time, the more muscle you have, the more calories you're gonna be able to consume in that building phase, in that off season, in that maintenance state, without having to worry about it being turned into body fat. So ideally, the more muscle you have, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm into that. I think muscle is, I've coined it as metabolic gold. I think it's so important. Do you primarily work with other people that are doing bodybuilding, or do you take like just kind of the average person that's overweight and help them get in shape and leaner? What's your clientele look like?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely. It's funny. I market to bodybuilders. Like I'm a bodybuilder. That's kind of where all my branding. That's who I'm marketing to. But the majority of my clients are probably middle-aged women that never intend to step on a stage ever. So it's kind of funny. But I work with everybody that's wanting to just simply improve their composition, because the methodologies I use for competitors is not really that different for people that are just trying to, live day-to-day life. I mean, I expect them to be as detailed and disciplined as if they were stepping on stage, because that's going to help them reach that goal much more efficiently. But if they're willing to do that, then I'm ready to work with them for sure.
And and again, knowing that this is a person that's never going to step on stage, probably isn't going to train with the intensity that you or many other bodybuilders do. Is there a different strategy for that, or is it pretty much just the same thing? Or how do you deal with the two differences? Because my assumption is I can consume more protein than the average person. One, I'm 240 pounds, but I train pretty hard. And so I can justify eating 250, 300 grams of protein at times. Now, I'm not, when I'm, again, just like you, if I want to get leaner, I'm going to drop back on basically calories in general, but I don't go quite as high fat when I'm doing that. But how do you, like, let's say you've got a female who wants to lose 20 pounds and not get on stage. How does that go?
Yeah, so their training's gonna look a little bit different. I still would encourage that they do train, but basically, like everything's just gonna be scaled back. Their total calories are gonna be scaled back. Their total fat intake, their total protein intake, all that's gonna be scaled back a little bit. But the percentages, the ratios, and how the protocol goes is gonna be pretty similar in the grand scheme of things. They're just gonna have less intake because they're not asking near as much of their body in the first place.
Yeah. And let's talk about, I guess, the reverse diet. I think that's an interesting, that's I've been hearing about reverse dieting for the last, I don't know, 8 years, something like that. That's kind of a newer concept, because in years past, reverse dieting for a bodybuilder was just gorge on pizza and ice cream. Everything you didn't get to eat while you're doing your contest prep. So how do you approach that? Let's say I get down to, 8 or 9% body fat. And now I'm like, okay, I got there. I've kind of helped, because like I said, I think if you kind of move this set point needle, you kind of get used to being leaner for a period of time. You hold it for a while, and then it becomes, like you said, a little bit more effortless to maintain closer to that. How does reverse dieting look like to you?
Yeah, so let's just imagine you're at the end of your cut, whether that's a prep or just a cutting protocol. You've got, your lowest body fat, ideally at that point, your lowest caloric intake at that point, and also your lowest maintenance metabolic rate at that point. So when you're dropping calories, your metabolism depresses as basically a survival mechanism to, you know, survive in the context of that lower intake. If you were to automatically bring your maintenance intake back to what it was at the onset of the prep, that would be above your maintenance, and you'd likely put on a bunch of unnecessary body fat. So what I typically recommend people do with my protocol, there's that period, that month or so at the very end where their protein's a little bit lower. So after the cut is over, I'll automatically bump that protein back up to about a 1 to 1, 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass, or per pound of, body weight at that point, because they are probably going to be pretty lean, just to basically ensure they don't have any muscle wasting in that context. And then I'll gradually start increasing both dietary fat and dietary protein over the course of the next 2 or 3 months. A good rule of thumb is for, people to spend about 3 times as much time in a surplus as they do in a deficit. So if I'm cutting for 4 or 6 months, I'll typically spend about 2 or 3 months reverse dieting and getting back up to my maintenance intake. And then I'll stay at that maintenance or slight surplus for oftentimes a year and a half, 2 years before I transition back into another cutting phase. Because it takes a lot of time to build muscle, especially if you're a natural athlete. So making sure you don't just constantly go into this chronic, dieting cycle in which you're spending more time in a deficit than you are in a surplus. That's honestly probably the biggest mistake I see people making is they spend so much more time in a deficit than they do in a surplus, or at least in a maintenance. And it's going to have a downward effect on their metabolic rate, their ability to maintain proper hormone function, certainly to build any more muscle tissue. So they wind up getting worse and worse with every year that passes, as opposed to better and better. So having that reverse diet period, having a strategic plan for reversing out of that deficit and then staying above that deficit for enough time to see the benefits that come with it is absolutely key. It gripes me to see so much momentum being made right now in the space for all these crazy crash dieting, like all this. I don't want to say any names or anything, but a lot of people are advocating all these, 400 calorie, 500 calorie, 600 calorie protein sparing modified fast diets in which people wind up doing them, more days out of the week than not. And that's just wrecking havoc from a metabolic and hormonal standpoint, without really any talk around the benefits of being a caloric surplus. So, yeah, you got to have a healthy balance to both sides of the equation there.
Let's talk a little bit about outside of lifting. Some people include cardio as part of the bodybuilding. Traditionally, it was get up at 5 a.m. and walk for an hour on the treadmill at a slow rate. I can remember those days where people were, doing their cardio and stuff. Like, what is your approach to cardio? Do you do any cardio? Do you think it's important? Do you do HIIT training? I mean, what are your thoughts on HIIT training and bodybuilding, or just traditional long, slow, steady distance cardio? How do you approach that, or do you not need it at all?
Yeah. So when it comes to cardio, you pretty much have to ask yourself the question of what is the goal of the cardio? If the cardio is to improve your metabolic conditioning and cardiovascular health, that's going to look a little bit different than if the goal is to simply improve your body composition, which in turn will improve your metabolic state and uh, cardio health as well. But there's kind of like which one do you want to prioritize? So like in the context of optimizing my body composition, I prefer to treat cardio as having like a minimum viable dose standpoint. So I'll start my prep with a relatively high caloric intake and a very minimal cardio stance. And then as calories drop, my cardio has an inverse relationship to calories and basically gradually increases, because I want to see how I can make my body composition change as a result of those nutritional manipulations alone. And then as my body starts to plateau from those nutritional manipulations, I can slowly titrate the cardio up. A lot of people go into a cut and they're starting off with 7 days a week of cardio, an hour a day, and their body adapts to that higher cardio input. And then it becomes very hard to move past that, because if you're already doing 7 days a week of cardio, you can't really add an eighth day of cardio. So if you treat it as a minimum viable dose and only increase it as needed as your body plateaus from the nutritional manipulations, you've got much more of a trick up your sleeve, so to speak, to add into the equation if your body does start to plateau.
Yeah, so I guess that makes sense, because if you step on the gas pedal 100% from the beginning, you got nowhere to go from there, and so your body
Exactly.
will eventually adapt to everything you do, and so you want to continue to have ways you can increase the dosage or frequency or something like that. And otherwise, you have people spending 7 hours a day on a treadmill, which is, obviously going to be miserable. Most people don't sustain it. So when we're talking about, let's just put it in context for you. So as you are into your contest prep week, say you're, a couple weeks out, how much cardio are you actually doing? Are we at an hour a day at this point? Are we at 30 minutes, or where are you at?
I pretty much never do more than 20 minutes of cardio at a time. And I'll typically use the Stairmaster as my preferred form of cardio because it's easy to track, it's easy to manipulate. And there's not really much risk of injury with Stairmaster. Like there's not going to be like sprints or something. I've done sprints in prior competition preps, and I've pulled my hamstring 2 weeks before the show. So pretty much swore off doing that. But with a Stairmaster, there's minimal risk of injury. I can easily manipulate it via either the length of time that I'm doing it, the intensity level, or the duration. So as the show day gets closer, I'm doing a lot more cardio than I was at the very beginning of the prep. Again, I never really go beyond 20-minute sessions. So I may be doing 20 minutes, but it'll only be for, a few times that week based off how my body's looking at that point. But doing, 2 hours of cardio 7 days a week is pretty counterproductive. That's going to inhibit your ability to train. And if your training is inhibited, then your ability to preserve the lean muscle mass you have is going to be inhibited. So really treating cardio as like the minimum viable dose is going to be key.
Yeah, and I understand that, about not injuring yourself, because there's certain things I find, like I said, I'll do a lot of sprints, but I'll do them on the bike. I
Mhm.
don't find that I don't find that particularly dangerous as far as injury is concerned. Are there any advantages from a cardio standpoint to say, let's just say I do some bike sprints, I can do a pretty decent workout in under 10 minutes on a bike, with sprints with, all out sprint for 10, 20 seconds, and then maybe rest for a minute or 2 minutes. Pros or cons on that approach?
Yeah, I mean, with a hit style cardio, you're going to burn more calories probably, and I mean, you're definitely going to burn more calories in the same time window as you would with LISS. So, if your goal is to maximize caloric expenditure in this short amount of time as possible, then I would 100% recommend the hit style training like you're talking about. For me, I like to use cardio as my like zone out time. So I'll do the Stairmaster when I'm in a prep. And that's like I put my head down, I put my earbuds in. That's when I listen to a podcast or watch a YouTube video. So I kind of learn to yearn for that, 20-minute session where I'm just able to zone out from the world and kind of go inward for a moment there. Because I'd like to take the intensity that I could be putting towards the hit session and pretty much put that towards my training and then let myself just zone out on that list session for 20 minutes.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because we always training and diet. It's kind of when you think about bodybuilding, that's what people talk about. But does a role of stress mitigation and sleep, how impactful is that on your result?
Oh, it's huge, man. I mean, like with every prep I've done, I've gotten to a point where I'm less stressed. I mean, my goal as a bodybuilder is to eventually be able to get to the point where I can do a competition prep and my wife not even know that I'm in a prep. Like that would be good, because then it's like I'm in a zen state, stress levels are low and all is well. The more stressed you are, you're obviously going to have a pretty significant reduction in your ability to recover. Your sleep's going to be hindered. That's going to affect your ability to recover from your training. Testosterone is going to take a massive hit if you're super stressed, and everything just becomes a chore that you don't look forward to. I mean, you want the whole process to be sustainable in the sense that you don't want each day to be miserable. So if you're reducing your stress, getting ample sleep, and kind of at peace with everything, your ability to look better on show day is going to be better because you're going to have a better prep to begin with. Your several months of prep are going to be more sustainable. And on show day itself, if you're super stressed, you're going to hold a lot of unnecessary fluid weight, in your subcutaneous layer of skin. That's going to distract from how good you could potentially look if that was not the case. So, really minimizing stress in the context of that peak week is super important as well.
Yeah, and what about the other thing? Obviously bodybuilding. I mean, a lot of it, skin counts. I mean, some people that come in there. Like I said, some of these guys, particularly ones that are abusing anabolics, end up with a bunch of acne and stuff like that. Is there any kind of skin stuff you do? I mean, I see a tan is super important. Now you paint on your tan before you get on stage and all that stuff. But do you find that you have to do anything special with the skin for this?
No, I mean, main thing is like having a good base tan. So like using a tan in bed or going outside, getting a good base tan prior to putting on the show day tan. And some competitors use like the spray tan the night before and the day of the show. Some competitors use dream tan, which is kind of like a boot polish that you put on there. There's a lot of different tanning, techniques. Obviously you don't want to be super hairy when you put on this, tanning solution. So making sure you've, shaved and everything prior to is important. I've competed backstage with some people that look like they're akin to Chewbacca. You don't want that to be happening backstage. So making sure you've got proper skin conditioning and shaving in advance is always important.
How long do you think you're going to bodybuild for? Is this a lifetime thing? You're going to be doing it? You're going to be up on stage when you're 80, or what do you think?
Man, I tell you what, I think like I'm 30 years old right now and I've never looked better. I've never felt better. I feel good about where everything's going. And I see a lot of people that are competing, but they're not like with natural bodybuilding. It's an old man sport. Like the more you do it, the better you get. And there's a lot of like with natural bodybuilding, they're super strict on HRT, TRT. Like you can't do any of that stuff. Like they've got a really stringent list of banned substances. But I feel like with a ketogenic diet, carnivore diet, my inflammation's at an all-time low. I'm able to train hard, intense with more frequency because my recovery is better. So I want to be. I mean, everybody like right now points to Mark Sisson as this like Greek god of a guy that looks great at his age. I mean, I'm going to totally beat out Mark Sisson. I'm going to make him look like he doesn't know what he's doing. That's the plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark's in his late 60s now. Mark does look good, but he's certainly there's a I always like when I see somebody that's really kind of just thin, and they have
Mhm.
abs. I'm like, well, that's not really that big of a deal. I mean, you just get skinny. But I mean, to
Yeah.
have a decent amount of muscle mass and have abs at the same time, that's a hell of a lot harder to do because you've got to constantly deal with eating a lot of enough food to put on muscle, but yet, I mean, yet maintain a low body fat. If you're just skinny as can be and you drop that 130 pounds and you eat like a bird, yeah, you're going to have abs, but that's not really
Exactly.
that impressive. Um, what? Oh, this is the thing I should. So you said, some of these organizations are very strict on hormone replacement therapy, and I always get accused of being on TRT, and I'm not. I just say, look, I just don't need it, and I don't do that. But there are quote unquote natural bodybuilders, and that's, oh yeah, I'm just taking 600 units of testosterone cypionate, injected, but that's natural. What organizations are actually that are you competing in that are actually you think legitimately natural?
So the thing is, man, like if people are going to be dishonest, you can be dishonest in any organization, and there's not really any way to 100% safeguard against that. The organization that I typically compete in is the WNBF INBF Federation. So that stands for World Natural Bodybuilding Federation. And what they do is they polygraph all competitors, before the show. So every competitor gets polygraphed. So the lie detector test, and there's ways to cheat that system. They also have a banned substance list that is freaking intensive. I mean, it's got everything banned. Most of them have a 10-year ban. So if you're caught with any of those substances in your system, you're banned from competing in that organization for 10 years. And then if you win, your class or the overall, obviously, they'll oftentimes do a urinalysis test on you as well. So there's ways to mitigate and kind of beat the system, so to speak. But I just hope that most competitors are honest and playing by the rules. For me, I got into the sport because I wanted to maximize my health and longevity and be as best I can be. And I'm not really motivated to take a bunch of drugs because I feel like I'd be defeating the purpose of doing what I set out to do at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot to be said for. There's a lot of benefits to bodybuilding. Some of those things. When we see the current Olympia guys, when they come up, they're on stage at 280 pounds and ripped. They're taking, gosh, who knows how much amount of drugs
Yeah, they're all
they're on
taking
for that.
drugs.
Yeah, I know clearly. I mean, I remember, and again, I as a kid growing up, I used to kind of read the muscle mags, Flex magazine, and whatever Weeder publications. And there was a guy, I think his name was Mike Ashley, if I'm not mistaken, but he was supposedly a natural bodybuilder, but he was competing at Mr. Olympia and those types of things. Who do you think legitimately, what is the sort of the maximum potential for a natural athlete that you can point to? Is there anybody out there that you say is this guy's legitimately natural and he's probably the biggest freak that we have?
Man, that's a good question. It's so funny because like I'm never going to be the biggest guy. Like I said, I competed 160 pounds. I'm 5'8", so I'm never going to be the biggest guy on stage. There's one natural bodybuilder. So Doug Miller he competes as a natural. He's done the natural federations, and he's intense, man. Like he looks like he belongs on the untested federation stages. I mean, he looks the part. And he says that he's natural. He's claiming he's natural. So who am I to say that he's lying? But I mean, he's a perfect example of what, if he is in fact natural, what I would imagine to be pretty much the apex of possibility from a natural standpoint.
Yeah, interesting. How about, have you been injured? Have you had to deal with any injuries over the years?
Not really. I had a pretty bad shoulder injury, not pretty bad, but a relatively bad shoulder injury from doing incline dumbbell press, getting the dumbbell up to position. I pulled something. And then I was doing squats one day with only 315 pounds. So it wasn't, heavy for me, but I had the 2 or 3 lower facet joints in my back slip out. And then I was out for the count for like 2 weeks, but I didn't, have any surgery or anything for that. It's totally healed up now. So that's pretty much the extent of my injuries. I dropped a 45-pound plate on my big toe, said a couple bad words, and didn't walk too well for a couple of days. But other than that, that's pretty much the extent of my injuries.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think bodybuilding is actually a fairly safe sport when it comes to injury. I mean, I can lift weights all the time and never really have an injury unless I do something just plain out completely stupid. But I usually I'm smart enough and old enough to realize that. Jiu-jitsu, I'm beat up all the time though. I mean, I'm always in here. I feel like I've been to a train like every day. I wake up and I'm like, damn it, what,
Yeah.
what do I keep going? Um, do you is natural bodybuilding growing as a sport, or is it? I know like in powerlifting, when I was competing many years ago, uh, obviously there's a lot of drugs in that sport as well. There's drug tested groups which I competed in, but there was a lot of equipment, a lot of this equip lifting, and then they've gone to this raw sort of mentality. But is natural bodybuilding growing alongside? I mean, bodybuilding will always be kind of a bit of a fringe sport. It only attracts a certain amount of people, and some people find it appealing, other people find, particularly I think the drug tested. I mean, the drug utilization. A lot of people look at those guys and say, that looks freaky, but it's not for me. Whereas natural bodybuilding, most people would say, they'll kind of harken back to like Steve Reeves and, these classic bodybuilders. It looked still like normal human beings, but very aesthetically pleasing. Is natural bodybuilding growing as a sport overall that you can tell?
I would say that it's probably growing. I mean, I think that more people are competing naturally than in the past, but I don't know that it's growing in proportion to untested bodybuilding, because you see a lot of people doing that now as well. I mean, the amount of people, the amount of pro bodybuilders that have died just this past year in the untested federations, like it blows my mind. I mean, they're kind of dropping like flies right now. And I feel like people are starting to wisen up, or at least I would hope that they were starting to wisen up to the fact that taking a bunch of drugs at such a young age to try and reach, 300 pounds of lean stage weight is not the most healthy, sustainable thing to do. So I would hope that the natural federations are growing. The NPC just recently came up with a new division for classic bodybuilding, and that's gained a lot of popularity. So that's basically downsized version of what the open bodybuilding looks like. And it's trying to emulate more of the classic, golden era, 80s, Arnold Schwarzenegger's era of bodybuilding. And that by definition winds up looking similar to natural bodybuilding. So I feel like that's kind of bode well for the sport of natural bodybuilding. People are starting to see what is achievable in a natural state, because it really is truly impressive. I mean, the thing about natural bodybuilding is just walking around day-to-day life, you don't look like a bodybuilder. Like when you get your clothes on, you don't look like a bodybuilder. But when you're leaned out and on stage and competing, I personally think that the look that you bring to the table is far more impressive than if somebody is taking a bunch of gear and they've got an extra 100 pounds on them. They don't have the level of conditioning that you oftentimes see in the elite level with natural bodybuilding. So if you really start diving into the sport of natural bodybuilding, it's pretty impressive. And I feel like as more people start to look for healthy alternatives, it's going to, by definition, gain popularity as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I see there's all these, obviously there's all these new there's men's physique, and there's, bikini and figure. I mean, you see all these different versions of quote unquote bodybuilding or physique sports that are coming out there. Let me ask you about women. Do you find that natural women bodybuilders, because, one of the concerns is, a lot of these women, they put on so much muscle that, many people find that particularly off-putting. They're like, this doesn't even look like a woman anymore. She's got more muscle than I do. And it's just kind of like, that's kind of freaky. I mean, are you seeing more women in the natural side than men?
I don't know. I mean, you're seeing a lot of like bikini is probably the biggest division. You see a lot of people doing bikini, and then you see a lot of guys doing men's physique, which is the board shorts. So those are always the two most popular divisions that have the most competitors in them. So there are definitely a lot of female natural competitors. I mean, the women that think they're going to automatically blow up and look like a man on the cover of Muscle and Fitness is just like, you're not going to get that way unless you're taking a bunch of gear. I mean, women that train very hard, have their nutrition dialed in, and are doing everything perfectly right and consistent, they look healthy. They look like they're supposed to look. Like, you're not going to look like a man unless you're taking on a bunch of exogenous hormones, like if you were a man.
And there are some women on the bikini stage that don't look like men. They're very muscular, but they're also taking drugs. I mean, they're also doing that just enough to sort of get that extra level of muscularity and leanness, I suppose. And that's the thing, particularly for women, they end up becoming, they have all this masculinization. Their voices get deeper, body parts that aren't supposed to grow, and, that type of stuff. And so a lot of women, I would imagine, don't want that. I mean, there's some that have kind of, they don't care. It's like, get as big, as strong as possible, no matter what. What are some of the biggest mistakes you're seeing people make with regard to bodybuilding?
Well, in the context of, just simply kind of what I was saying earlier about the reverse diet, like skipping that reverse diet portion, skipping that time spent in a caloric surplus. I see people doing that across the board, whether they're competing or not. In the context of traditional bodybuilding versus what I'm doing with a ketogenic approach, I don't know if ketogenic bodybuilding is ever going to become mainstream within the sport of bodybuilding, because it's just, there's so much dogma ingrained in that industry. Everybody assumes you have to have carbohydrates. They assume you have to have super high protein and relatively low dietary fat. But I see so many competitors uh, going through this with a traditional, if it fits your macros or bro dieting approach, keeping dietary fat very low and having higher protein, higher carbs. And then the tendency for those competitors to finish their show and then totally go off the rails on a binge fest, eating everything that's, sugary and sweet in sight, happens much more often than not. I mean, I think it's probably a fair statement to say that there are more athletes that compete in bodybuilding and figure and bikini that struggle with some form of disordered eating than not. And I feel like by not having to break free from what you're doing that brought you the success to begin with is hugely beneficial. So like for me, when I'm done with a competition, I go to a Brazilian steakhouse and put down a bunch of meat, and I don't have this tendency to binge like I would if I was eating a bunch of carbohydrates. And I feel like that binge purge cycle is super common and incredibly detrimental for most competitors.
Yeah, I've seen, and it seems particularly common among these women fitness competitors that, basically realize they have an eating disorder. They wreck their hormones, they wreck their perception and relationship with food. Do you have some of I mean, I imagine you said you do a lot of like middle-aged women that just want to lose weight, but you do probably have a decent amount of bodybuilders that have come from the quote unquote the bro style of dieting to what you're doing. Are they commenting on what are they finding when they do that? Are they finding it's easier? Do they feel better? What's the result of that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of my competitors just earned his pro card, and he had competed, I think, in 2013 with a traditional carbohydrate-based approach, and then he competed here this past year with my approach, my coaching, in a total ketogenic state, and he felt better all the way through. His hormone level stayed stable. We tested his hormones at the onset and after about a month of reverse dieting, and he didn't see near the dip that is common with traditional approach. And he honestly just felt great. Like you're going to be hungry, like you're going to be depleted, you're going to be in a deficit, you're going to be hungry and tired and a little bit more irritable, no matter what diet you're following. But for many people, I found that doing a ketogenic approach with higher dietary fat and right protein intake and not really having that carbohydrate as a variable lends itself to being much more sustainable and much more tolerable for a lot of people. So I don't ever want to say that this is the only way. There's obviously a lot of ways to get lean. I've competed. I've won shows with the carbohydrate based approach. So have most other competitors out there. But for me, I was highly motivated to create this dieting philosophy around a ketogenic or carnivore approach that would be equally, if not even more advantageous than the traditional approach, and let people feel that they had hope for something that would be better for them. I mean, everybody's not going to be excelling with a whole bunch of carbohydrates. So providing them with a healthier, uh, possibly optimal alternative was my whole goal for creating this protocol.
Do you monitor your ketones per se? Are you checking ketones all the time, or is there something you kind of got past? And I see a lot of folks that, they go on ketogenic diets, but yet because it becomes so efficient at utilizing the ketones, that they don't really register high ketones. Are you looking at that throughout your contest prep period of time? Is that giving you any information that you don't already have? What do you do about ketone monitoring?
Yeah, I don't do it because I feel like I have to do it. I'll sometimes do it out of curiosity. It's kind of advantageous, like when I'm trying to titrate protein up and figure out what my protein threshold is. There's a couple different factors I look for. Like when I reach my protein threshold, I notice I have more bloating, more GI distress. I'm a little bit less cognitively focused, less mental clarity, less energy. But I'll also kind of look at ketones and blood glucose at that point. I'll typically see a significant increase in blood glucose and a significant drop in blood ketones. So if I'm seeing all those factors simultaneously, I can feel pretty confident that I've reached that threshold. But you certainly don't have to test ketones and glucose by any means. And as you get deeper and deeper into your deficit, you're probably going to see lower blood glucose and higher blood ketones by definition.
And when you reach your protein threshold, what does that typically look like for you? I mean, you said you might be uh, I guess depending on the phase of your diet, but what do the numbers look like for you before you start seeing the higher blood glucose and the lower ketones?
So in my last prep, I believe I reached my threshold. I was at around 215 grams of fat and 200 grams of protein. And again, it just totally changes based off of where I'm at in the dieting phase. Like right now, I'm taking in 200 grams of protein a day, but I'm in a building phase. So all my calories are much higher. Like I'm taking in, an extra 1,000 calories right now as I was, back then in my last prep. So the context of where you're at in the dieting phase is important. But for my last prep, it was about that 1-to-1 ratio, 1 gram of protein per gram of dietary fat.
Okay. All right. Well, Robert, this is great. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Let people know one word, what the name of the book again, where they can get it, your website, your social media, so people can find us. This is interesting. I think some people will definitely benefit from it.
Yeah, man. Appreciate the opportunity. So for me, Keto Savage, ketosavage.com, Keto Savage on social. And the book, you can get it on Amazon, but I've got a website for the book by the same name of the book, which is just ketogenicbodybuilding.com. There's a free spreadsheet that people can download there as a way to track their macros, track their weight if they want to go through the protocol.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Robert. Good luck to you. You going to be speaking anywhere this year, or are you going to, what's the year look like for you coming up?
Yeah. So the baby's coming in May. So when the baby, it's gonna probably throw a little bit of wrench at things, but after the baby gets here, we're planning on speaking at KetoCon, and then I'm pretty sure I've got a conference every month. I think KetoCon's in July, and I believe I'm slated to speak at a conference every month thereafter. So KetoCon, the Keto Las Vegas, there's a Keto Symposium. There's a couple different ones, Keto Summit Omaha. I got to get it all on a calendar somewhere, but quite a few conferences coming up for sure. So I'm sure I'll see you in person here for too long.
Yeah, it'd be great to see. Yeah, I'd be happy to start seeing people in real life again. It'd be a lot of fun. And then the keto bricks, you got some new flavors or something? I think there was a new flavor just came out, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we just launched Macadamia Madness, which is our lowest carbohydrate brick. There's only 8 grams of carbs in that one. And we've got a few new flavors on the way as well. And that's ketobrick.com for those.
And it's 8 grams of carbohydrate. If I'm not mistaken, there's 1,000 calories in the keto brick. Is that correct?
Yeah, each one's 1,000 calories. So 8 grams of total carbs. I don't play this net carb, reindeer games. I do total carbs. So yeah, a lot of dietary fat, moderate dietary protein, very low total carbs.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here. Robert, thanks again.
Thank you, man.
Congratulations. Good luck on the new baby, and look forward to seeing you in person in the near future. All right,
Sounds
guys.
great, brother.
Thank you, guys. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Thanks, Robert. Take care now. Bye-bye.